Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Police officers of Reddit, have you ever been called to a home for a paranormal reason? In true Reddit fashion, I'm a medic, not a police officer, but there were police officers with us that night. Cops got called out before us to a domestic because neighbors in this government-subsidized housing complex in the ghetto reported screaming and banging. Now, this place is notorious for being in one of the worst neighborhoods the city has to offer and is riddled with drug dealers and guns and prostitution and human trafficking, so for somebody to actually report a domestic, it has to be a bad one. Cops get there first, make a scene, nope right back out of the apartment, and call EMS for a psych patient. My partner and I don't get told any of this background information, just get sent for a psych call and told PD is already on scene. We drive up, park the ambulance, unload the stretcher, and jump bags, and double-check that all doors and compartments are locked because we know from experience there's about a 1 in 5 chance that someone will try to bust in and steal drugs while we're upstairs. We walked into the stairwell and there's 4 police officers waiting for us. These are all police officers we work with regularly and drink with on our off time and are all experienced officers with years of dealing with the ugliest things this neighborhood can produce. And they are literally, physically, shaking. I ask them what's going on and one of them, chalk white, says, "There's a possessed guy upstairs." I realized the officer next to him was clutching a rosary. So, I'm pretty agnostic at this point in my life, and my partner, though Baptist, really just goes to church a couple of times a month because his wife thinks it's important for their children to be brought up in the church. Neither of us are die-hard Irish Catholics like you see commonly throughout police and fire departments even here in the South. So, we laughed it off. The officer gets angry with us and says that this guy upstairs has been acting oddly for weeks, according to his family, Mexican immigrants, no idea if they were legal or not, and about 30 minutes ago he started screaming at them that he was going to eat them, that he was being dragged back to hell because he had broken the agreement, and then started begging Maria Immaculata, the Virgin Mary, to save him. They tried to restrain them, but he was too strong. Then he started extremely angry and putting his hands into the holy candles they have on their shrine to the Virgin and started screaming in a language none of them recognized, at which point their neighbors called. I rolled my eyes at all of this because this is not the first psychotic break call I have worked, and because all of these symptoms are completely typical of that. I was not surprised the man would claim to be possessed, as Catholic mysticism has an extremely strong influence on the immigrant Hispanic community in our city. I have often picked up dead SIDS babies that the family has draped in medals and rosaries, or old men with obvious marks of self-flagellation. It's just part of working in the barrio and it stopped freaking me out years ago. I say something to that effect to the police officer, and he looks at me like he wants to throttle me. He says, "I know, don't you think I've seen that, too?" I'm telling you, this guy locked himself into the bedroom, and we could hear multiple voices in there with him. We broke down the door and he was on the ceiling. My partner and I both blink at that, but honestly, it was late, I was tired, he was quitting smoking and so we asked the police officer if there were weapons involved. He said no, we said fine, we're going in. We walked up the stairs and into the apartment with the police officers trailing extremely far behind us. The kitchen is full of wailing older women clutching various photos of Mary and candles to their chests, and terrified children huddled in a corner. My partner, whose Spanish is better than mine, asks a few questions about medical history and drug allergies, then tells one of the relatives that this man is extremely sick, but we will take diligent care of him. She tries to tell him he's not sick, but my partner reassures her that everything is okay, and we are here to help. The whole time this conversation is happening the guy in the bedroom is screaming gibberish so loudly the walls are literally shaking. Someone is burning incense in another corner of the kitchen and my eyes are watering from it. The police officers are in a little knot in the doorway, shoulder to shoulder. I start to walk towards the bedroom and one of the officers says, "Wait," walks over, and drapes his rosary and St. Michael's medal over my head. I'm a tiny woman, so it's huge and hangs almost to my belly button. It chimes off of my badge every time I move my head. My partner and I stand by the bedroom door and have a very quick discussion of the plan. Go in, verify safety of the scene, make a brief attempt to verbally calm the man down, then if that is not successful, tackle him to the ground, have the police help us restrain him, and sedate him if we feel it is necessary. We have both done this dozens of times, sometimes just the two of us without police backup, so we are honestly not that worried. We open the door and walk into the bedroom quickly but calmly, hands visible, and my partner politely addresses the man by his name and asks how he is feeling today. The bedroom is lit by a single small desk lamp. The man is crouched in the far corner, head down, and when my partner says his name he picks his head up. The way he did it was disturbing, completely lacking in self-consciousness, the way a dog will when you call it. He moved just his head and neck, his shoulders stayed hunched. Again, severely mentally ill people sometimes move this way, so I was not surprised. My partner asks again how the man is feeling and if he would talk with us for a minute. The man smiles and says something harshly in Spanish I don't catch, so I ask my partner what he said. My partner says, God himself will not recognize you when I am done with you. Okay, so that was slightly more articulate than the usual threat, but again, I've been working in the ghetto for 6 years at that time and have been threatened far more explicitly than that, so not really rattled. I do say, I think we should just take him into custody, and my partner nods in agreement. The man stands up at that, and I see he has been clawing at his face. There is blood and foam running down his chin and bare chest. When I tell this story people often say, oh, he had rabies, but incredibly angry people often hypersalivate and foam. He smiled at us again, and looked at me and said, in English, that trinket won't help you, and gestured to my chest, I assume to the rosary. When I glanced down at it, he rushed us. My partner and I took him to the ground, and he fought with the crazed strength you only see in the mentally ill and people high on PCP. We shouted for the police officers, and they rushed in and dogpiled him. My partner wiggled out of the mess and drew up the medications. He then walks around the pile looking for a good injection site, walks by the guy's head, and says, Jesus Christ, and drops what he's holding. The guy abruptly stops struggling, gives this horrible deep belly laugh, and says, look closely so you don't forget. I asked my partner if he's okay. He doesn't answer, but he does pick up the medication and sedate the guy. We get him on the backboard, web him in, carry him down the stairs to the stretcher, and get him on oxygen. He is quiet now, and not really struggling, but still murmurs to himself from time to time. On our way down and out, the whole group of wailing women follows us. My partner is white as a sheet and isn't talking to me at all. We load the guy into the ambulance, get a round of vital signs, and one of the police officers explains to the women that we will be going to the hospital, and they can have an officer take them there. Another officer jumps in back with us in case we need any help restraining. I turn to ask my partner if he wants to ride it in, and he just shakes his head and goes to the driver's seat. The guy is quiet the whole ride to the hospital. Normally I would chat with the officer, but he didn't want to talk. He kept his eyes glued to the guy and a hand in his holster. We got to the hospital, dropped him off with the ER nurse, and my partner excused himself and said he was going to the chapel. I almost went after him but decided to leave well enough alone. I wasn't really shaken up, honestly, but I was worried about my partner, because he doesn't spook easily. I went and cleaned the ambulance myself, got us both a cup of coffee, then went to find him. He was kneeling in the chapel and praying. I waited until he was done, handed him a cup of coffee, walked him back to the ambulance and, when we were safe in that warm brightly lit little space we always debrief in after calls, I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me and said his eyes were wrong. They weren't human. I waited a moment, but he didn't say anything else. I said, as nicely as I could, dude, I think you just got rattled by everything. I know it was freaky, but it was just a bad psych call. You know how those are. He shuddered, looked at me, and said, "I know what I saw." They were wrong. I've never seen a psych patient or a dead person or anything else with eyes like that. And then he told me never to speak of it again. Cop here. The short answer is yes. But it's not because they think ghosts are tormenting them, usually just because something wild has happened and they need help of some kind. What people, and police officers forget, or are learning in the age of education, is that being a police officer is actually a customer service industry. It is no longer the, "hate you, this is how this is going to go," that history shows it used to be. I digress. I can recall 3 off the top of my head. One family in 2007 reported hearing train sounds and screaming in their 140-year-old farmhouse. No train tracks for miles. Until you realized that the walking path behind the house was an old railroad line that donated the track space to complete the walking path. Never went back there. I saw and heard nothing, but why tempt fate? One young woman in 2009 had just moved into a new house, and when we got there, she opened the door and had a look of terror on her face, and the first thing she said was, "This house hasn't been blessed yet, there is something in the basement." Okay. I mean, blessed or not, got to check the basement. Guns and flashlights out, nothing. Stood there for about 10 minutes with the owner yelling at us from upstairs that it wouldn't happen because we were here. Furnace fires up, admittedly. It looked old, and it made some kind of noise that sounded like a growl with some banging. She starts screaming, "That's it, can you hear it?" We explained what it was. But she still left the house insisting that she would have a priest or something over to bless it before she came back. Finally, in 2008 I was sent to a call about a neighbor dispute, which is never an enjoyable time. Being a ref in the middle of 2 neighbors that have usually hated each other for eons is a reoccurring nightmare. I get there and this completely professional woman is angry beyond comprehension. I say professional woman because in my occupation, dealing with all types, the first thing I tend to see in people is education and professional level. She seemed normal, well-rounded, and there is nothing that would indicate any type of drug abuse or substances. She informs me that her neighbors are racist and have been threatening her by yelling through the wall when she is inside the house. This seems legit to me. She was convincing, and when I interrupted and had her retell the story at different points, it was always the same with the same details. In short, I could not twist her story and say to myself, "Seems like bullshit." So, I start writing things down that she says. She tells me that she has lived at the house with her husband for about a month and loves it. But every time they are inside the house their racist neighbor screams, "Leave the home," and they are tired of it. She goes on and tells me that before she called this time she was bringing groceries into the house, and she likes to pile all the groceries by the back door at one time and then take the bags to the kitchen. She told me that while she was in the kitchen, the neighbor shot a .24 case of pop with a pellet gun. I go outside and look at this case, and there are several cans inside the case that look to be leaking into empty, but I don't see where a projectile hit the case. It was also about 70 degrees and beautiful. So, I opened the case, which was sealed, and there were 4 cans that just looked smashed to hell. But the rest are fine, and I see no pellet holes or whatever else. Also, in my mind I have no idea how these cans could have been this deformed in the pattern they were found in without damaging cans near them, or the case they were in. I might be college educated and have some police EXP. But I shrug it off because how do I know they weren't damaged in packing or some other explanation? But the spider sense started tingling. But hey, I get paid for this stuff, so I went next door and did the police thing, and 2 of the sweetest old women ever live in the house, and they are of the same race as the neighbor in distress. No males live there or have been there. So, I go back to my complainant and ask where the voice comes from, and she points right at the old lady's house next door. I ask is it a male voice or female, and she without hesitation says male, and he sounds so pissed off all the time. So, in an effort to put this to rest, because obviously there was some kind of disconnect, and any time you can get neighbors to be happy they tend not to call anymore. I marched the complainant over to her neighbor's house to introduce everyone. She, like so many people now, had no idea who was living next to her. We all got invited inside, and if you could picture two grandmothers that were roommates, you can picture inside this house. They even had a candy tray and pastries to offer. So finally, I explained to the grandmothers what is going on. I shit you not, one looks right at me and goes, name omitted, said that happened to him before he passed. They then tell us that the previous homeowner before the current one apparently told his neighbors that a voice was yelling at him to leave the home a few months before taking a handful of sleeping pills. Now, I'm a pretty rational person. But the more I thought about it, crazy racist neighbors don't yell things like leave the home, they are usually more explicit and hateful. I kind of think that the only type of entity that would tell you to leave the home would be something inside the home. So, I have no idea what to believe. I know that a brief time later I saw a real estate sign in front of the house and the complainant packing her stuff into a truck. She waved. I waved back. But that's all I know, and I luckily am not assigned to that area anymore. My uncle is a police officer in a pretty sleepy town. He used to always go to the cemetery and take naps in his cruiser. He told me how, one night, he was awoken by a sound, and it startled him. He looked out the window and saw a weird glow coming from about 30 yards away. He kept looking, thinking maybe his sleepy eyes were playing tricks on him, but they remained. He decided to go check it out, and as soon as he got out of the car, the glow disappeared. He still walked towards the general vicinity, which was a group of gravestones, to investigate. He didn't see anything strange, but just as he was about to walk back to his cruiser, he realized the gravestone he was standing in front of had his last name on it. He said it completely freaked him out, and he ran back to the car and locked his door. He admits it's likely just a weird coincidence, but he also said that was the last nap he ever took on duty. I was sent to a residence where an old woman was upset that the ghost that lived in the attic was listening to the music too loud. She wasn't upset about the ghost, just that his music was too loud. I had heard of another officers going there before and just talking with her and shrugging it off. When I got there, I met with her on the porch. She was a sweet little old lady who couldn't hear Wheel of Fortune or whatever was on TV because of the ghost's music. I didn't hear any music but figured that since she did I ought to do something. She had one of those attics with the old school door you pull down that has stairs in it. I pulled that down and crept up the stairs slowly just in case there was a homeless person sleeping up there or something. When I finally got half my body up into the attic, I looked around and found no one or nothing. I asked her if she still heard the music and she said she had. Not knowing what else to do, I loudly said, "This is the police department, I am here on a noise complaint. The homeowner requests that you turn the music down as it is disturbing her." I stood at the top of the stairs/door thing for a few, then looked back down at her. She stood there looking at me unchanged, then suddenly smiled. She said, "Oh, thank you so much, young man," and walked into her living room. I climbed down and closed the attic up. She turned her television on, smiled again and thanked me again. We haven't been called back there since. I still stop in once in a while to see how she is though. She said that the ghost is much better now about his music, but still plays it loud from time to time, just not enough to warrant calling the police. I like my job, front row seat to the greatest show on earth. Not dementia, just humans in general. I used to work as a licensed practical nurse in a nursing home. I worked the night shift, so it was usually slow. One night I was at one end of the hall for my break. Break ended and I was walking back to the center of the hall to the nurse's station. As I was walking, a resident I'll call Mary walked by me and we smiled at each other as we passed. It wasn't unusual for Mary to go to the break room at night to get a cup of coffee or a snack. As I get to the nurse's station, I see the nurse aides at the other end of the hall. It's the opposite end of the hall from the break room. They looked agitated and they were waving at me like they needed help. I actually jogged to them because it looked urgent. I get to them, and they tell me Mary has passed away. There she was sitting in her chair dead. Yet just seconds before I'd passed her in the hall near the break room. Still gives me shivers just thinking about it. Oh God, I work in a nursing home and try to be very skeptical of supernatural things, but it's bloody hard sometimes. We've had a woman move into a room after the previous occupant died and started talking about Dave, who was in her room at night. The man's name was Dave, but we laughed it off as coincidence, because it is a common name, right? Then she told us he was telling her his full name, and Jesus wept. It was the name of our dead guy. Also, we had a woman in her room on end-of-life care. No sign was given to the rest of the home that she was anything other than bedbound. Absolutely no suggestion that she may pass away, at the family's request. If asked around other residents, she was simply bedbound. One woman, with severe dementia, whose vocabulary consisted of yes, no, and cup of tea, started shouting in the corridor for several hours one night that there was going to be a funeral, a lady was going to die, all whilst refusing to move from outside this door. This woman never once saw the ill lady, but she was right, she passed away through the night. There were a few more things, but these are ones I was around to experience. My job freaks me out sometimes. My dad is a police officer and he recently told me a story from before I was born. He and his partner are patrolling in a rural town. A call comes in from an old lady that a group of men in white hoods are walking up and down her street. Now being in England, the clan would be an odd appearance, and so my dad, thinking this at least would be interesting, and another car drive to the street as fast as they can, from opposite sides. The two cars meet at the street, which is a dead end, with none of the men in sight. But the paranormal aspect is that my dad swears around 30 to 40 cats were just wandering in the middle of the street. All of the residents were out and none of them knew anything about the cats. Paramedic/volunteer firefighters, here. We covered a town in the middle of nowhere. Get a call from Woodchuck City, as we call it, which is a trailer park with all of the chaos you'd associate with an alcoholic meth scene, but without the alcohol and meth, they were just lazy, crazy Seventh-day Adventists. The call was FNRP, found non-responsive, with /weak pulse, so we rushed out there. These are usually overdoses or strokes, so time was important. I get there and when I come in there's 4 or 5 adults, all wearing their church clothes, black pants, white shirt, women in blue or gray gowns, which threw me off because it was about 2 in the morning on a weekday. Their Sabbath is Saturday, I think. I kneeled down next to her and felt her wrist. Cold as ice. My guess is they're wearing their clothes because they knew she was dead, and the minister was on the way for last rites or something. The paramedic with me asked if we should defib, and I shook my head, and tried to verify there weren't any vitals. Nothing. Their dog starts growling at me, and I'm thinking he doesn't like me touching her. I ask them to get rid of the dog, and he starts howling. Then the dog just stops. At the very moment the dog stops, a light blows out, and the dead person sits up, says, "Make sure, victim sister," gets the hell out of her place, and slowly lays down. My partner and I are freaked out, as I was certain that woman was dead, but nobody else is. Partner starts going through, checking, to see if I am stuck up. Nope, still dead, skin is getting a minor change. We called in the coroner, who has to come out from the other part of the county, nearly 40 minutes away. Sheriff radios in and says there'll be a few minutes, as a tree has fallen on a cabin a few miles away. Later found out they had called the sister, and she hadn't taken 2 steps out of her place when a tree had fallen on her cabin, totally destroying the bedroom in which she slept. I don't know if it fell directly on the bed, but, at that point, I didn't want to know any more about anything that happened that night. Not that I think anything paranormal was at work here, but it certainly wasn't normal what I saw. I am a 911 dispatcher, not a police officer. I'll always remember Mr. Blue, we'll call him. Nicest old man living kind of out in the middle of the desert. He was tagged in our system of having dementia. We used to take calls from him nearly every night, about how his wife's dolls would come to life and torment him, or how his wife was kidnapped by them. Might I mind you, she passed away, see. So, it seemed that every time he would call was right around my shift, and I just so happened to be the one to take his calls most of the time. It was a little creepy being on the phone with him at times. He would randomly shush me, and you could actually hear footsteps. Or he would explain that there was somebody living in his couch that he could hear laughing. Nicest old man, and you never want to deny them. So, I'd stay on 911 with him and talk to him about his life until the deputies arrived. Mr. Blue doesn't call in anymore. And I have no idea what happened. I called police officers once for suspicious people in my office building. It was about 11 p.m., the building was a huge 200-year-old house. Anyway, hear the front door open, and people walking up the stairs. No big deal. I'm locked in my office working. Except the footsteps never stop coming up. It sounds like a line of people one at a time climbing to the top, then to the attic pod above me, which was not finished and absolutely frightening. I called the police officers. Tell them my story. And ask them to come up the fire escape directly to my office. 2 police officers show up. In my office we stand quietly. We all listen, and the steps continue up and into the attic. One police officer says how long have they been coming in? 20 minutes, I tell them. They instructed me to leave by the fire escape and wait in the adjacent parking lot. They called for backup and all these police cars rolled up to where I was, no lights or sirens. On the radio could hear the first 2 police officers making a move out my office door, which opened directly at the top of the steps. All clear, they said. Attic door is open, going up. Over the radio we heard, what? The police officers with me rushed to the building and I could hear a load of shuffling feet and slamming noises. Soon all the police officers emerged and said it was nothing. They walked me back in to get my stuff and instructed me to go home for the night. They wouldn't tell me why or what they found. About a year later, at the end of my lease, I asked the management company rep if the place was haunted. I won't tell you it isn't, is what he told me. Told police officers saw something in my office building but wouldn't say it. There were other times/stories also, like when my wiring guy had to run line in the attic. My mom and brother called the police for what turned out to apparently be a paranormal reason a few years back. We still have no idea what exactly happened that day. I was staying at my mom's and had a terrible hangover, so I decided to take a nice stroll to the small, wooded bayou that was visible from the house but was far away that sound won't really reach if you yell. I ended up sitting by the water on a log since it had been raining a bunch and everything was muddy, with my back to the woods, just enjoying wind, flying birds, and water sounds. 10 minutes later I heard angry yelling and turned around to see my brother running my way with a baseball bat. My brother's a very non-violent guy, so to see him looking that angry scared me. When he got closer I realized that it wasn't me he was running at, but someone in the woods. He told me to run to the house and lock the doors, the police were on their way. Once home, my mom was by the door in hysterics saying she tried to call my cell to warn me, but all she got was cracking static. My phone was fine in my pocket, and we later tested it and concluded nothing was wrong with it. She says that she saw a large pale man staring at me from the woods as I was sitting. She tried my cell over and over to no avail, then went outside and yelled and whistled in my direction, but the wind carried the sound away. By this time, my brother heard my mom panicking and saw the man also. As he grabbed his bat, the man seemed to disappear in the foliage, only to crawl out of the woods on his belly like a large pale lizard heading my direction. By the time I turned around, the man slithered back into the trees. When the police officers got there, they searched the area thoroughly but didn't find the man. In fact, the only footprints they did find were mine, my brother's, and their own. They thought that maybe all my brother and mother saw was a large bird or shadow that they perceived as a man from the distance. To this day, they both remain adamant that there had been a man crawling out of the woods in the mud sneaking up on me that day. I don't know what to believe. My uncle used to be an officer, and one night while out on the beat he received a call from an elderly couple out in the boons. So, he and his partner went to check it out. When they got there they approached the elderly couple's house very nonchalantly because it was the boons, and they figured the couple had called in some kind of animal report. Nope. The couple had called in a report of strange chanting noises coming from behind their house by a bayou. Well, my uncle said, I'm using his own words here, no way am I going near a bayou at 2 in the morning. To which his partner replied, fine, stay by the elderly couple, they'll protect you. So, as I recall, the partner walked off to the bayou and was gone for roughly 3 minutes before he screamed for my uncle. They didn't find anyone there, but they did find a small voodoo shrine with a freshly killed chicken. My uncle and his partner kicked the shrine and the chicken into the bayou and told the elderly couple that they just saw a gator in the water and that it was probably the gator using a mating call. From what my uncle told me, they booked it right the hell right out of there and never went back. Not exactly a ghost story, but paranormal less. I responded to an elderly woman's home one evening because she reported that the disease control man was not answering his phone and the demons were in her curtain again. What? I looked at the curtain as she tried to get him to show himself, but I never saw him. She said that he was probably scared to come out. She told me that the disease control man comes by a few times a week to remove the demons from her home, but he had taken a few days off and the demons were out of control. After about 20 minutes of manipulating the curtain and trying to summon this demon, she asked me what I thought she should do. I told her that I'm just a police officer, so I don't have special powers like the disease control man, but if I was her I'd get a new curtain. That's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. She replied. I was her hero that day. Sometimes it's the trivial things. I used to regularly be called to a house by a man who had lost his wife. He was suffering from dementia and so he would report her missing often after having gone out looking for her. She had died about 1 year before he started ringing, which I had attended ironically, and apparently dementia can be brought on by sudden loss. So, I would go, and I would sit and ask him about his wife and what she looked like and where he had seen her, and he would tell me all about her and what they had done that morning. Sometimes he would conclude himself that she was dead, which was hard. Other times I would call his kids over who were adults, and they would keep up the charade till he went to bed. He would forget the next day. Never had the heart to tell him outright myself she was dead again. He would lose her all over again and it would be heartbreaking. He died about a year ago, about 2 years after her. I always think of them together now. Just wanted to say thank you for the kind comments and the gold. My mom was a police officer. She tells the story of an old woman who called the police almost weekly complaining that there was a ghost in her house. They'd go in, check it out, and tell her they couldn't find anything. One day, one of the guys on her squad gets dispatched to this lady's house. He busts in, worriedly, and asks if she has a 2-liter bottle. She nods back solemnly with wide eyes and empties out a Coke bottle she had. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. It could get messy." She runs outside to the front porch. The police walk upstairs, light up a cigarette and blow the smoke into the 2L bottle. He chills for a minute or two, then comes running out of the house, triumphantly holding the smoke-filled bottle, screaming, "I've got the ghost. I've got the ghost." He threw it into the back of his Crown Vic and sped off. They never got a call from the lady again. When I was working my way through university, I worked as a security supervisor at the local psych hospital. We had a mix of old buildings and modern buildings that were meant to replace the older buildings. The oldest building on site was built in 1856 and was exactly what you would envision a Victorian insane asylum to be: 18-inch thick brick outer walls, 12 thick inner walls, steel doors that must have weighed easily 400 pounds each, 25-foot tall ceilings, and a series of underground tunnels that connected the building to the rest of the hospital. When I started working there, the building still held approximately 200 patients, but a couple of years later those patients were moved to one of the new buildings that had just completed construction and the old building was closed. Maintenance staff went through and cannibalized the place for parts, pipe, light bulbs, locks, you name it. I was working a day shift, and I personally escorted the local telephone company through the building, removing all the phones and making sure all the lines were disconnected. A few weeks later I was working a night shift, and we got a call from the hospital switchboard telling us that she had the police on the line, and they were reporting a telephone call coming from inside the old building. I asked her to check the number as I knew there were no phones in the building. She confirmed the number and then told me that the police had been receiving calls every few minutes for over 2 hours and that it sounded like someone was breathing heavily into the phone and at other times like they were holding a conversation while holding their hand over the mouthpiece. As the supervisor, part of my job was security of that building. I had to go through each floor of the building every 2 hours. Because it sounded like someone was in there, I took another guard with me, and we searched all 4 floors and the basement tunnels. Nothing. We just get back to the guard post and the operator calls again and says there are more phone calls coming from the building and the police are demanding we get it to stop. So, back over we go, and this time I physically check off every place that had a phone. The only ones I couldn't get to were the elevator phones because the elevators were locked down. Even as we were in there, we were being told by the operator that there were phone calls coming in from various parts of the building. It went on like that pretty much all night. I passed the info along to the day shift, and when I got in the next night, they told me that the telephone company had come in and inspected everything and found that the main trunk going to the building had actually been severed, so there was no possible way for a phone call to be made from the building. They also looked at the possibility of old numbers being reassigned and found that they had not. This continued for several weeks off and on and then stopped completely. We never found out the actual explanation. We used to get calls routinely to a house in town where the lady was absolutely sure her house was possessed by a demon. I have seen her draw pentagrams on the floor, set up candle displays, and other things to get rid of demons. Up to and including a Catholic priest doing an exorcism of the house. One day I show up and she's telling me how it's progressed, and she can smell the demon. All I smell is natural gas. I stopped her from attempting to light her cigarette, pushed her outside, shut the oven off, and called fire to vent the house. Soon after this I finally convinced her family to place her in a facility. Had a guy who was convinced the CIA and Homeland Security rented all the apartments around him and were coming through the walls at night to whisper in his ear and plotting to kill him. Went there almost every day for 2 weeks before the VA decided to house him in their mental ward. Recently had an old man, 8-9, call and was convinced the aliens were talking to him through the fire sprinklers. Upon talking to management, found out his wife had died in the last couple of months, after 60-some years of marriage. It was a sad deal. You could tell the loss of his lifelong partner had completely broken his mind. Luckily, the family was already involved and got him into a solid care facility. Overall, though, people should have no need to invent monsters. They're all around us.
My boyfriend and I are at his parents' house now. It just so happened I wrote about the events yesterday, and not long after his parents invited us down for the day. If anyone has questions or wants to hear more stories, they're the people who would be able to answer them. So send me a message. ***, I personally have had to call the police because of something very strange. My boyfriend's family lives in an incredibly old house. The history is astonishing. There's a lot documented about the house's old owners and past. There are tunnels underground, which are blocked off now for the most part. At one point, the house was a safe haven for slaves attempting to flee from the south. Last winter, his family went home to Sweden for 2 weeks. They asked if we would house sit, as we have done in the past. The second night there we had a quiet night in, as it was snowing. We were upstairs and had just gotten into bed when we heard a bang. It scared me. We thought it was just a bedroom door closing because of the wind, which was weird because he had closed every door because of the draft problem. We turned on lights, went downstairs, and could not believe what had happened. The formal dining room table was now fully set with place settings. I'm talking folded napkins, the nice, old china, spoons, forks, everything. It was a 10-person table, and everything looked perfect, like a dinner party was about to happen. Here's the thing, the table is never set. It's used primarily as an office, and nothing was on the table. So, we started freaking out. Well, I did. My boyfriend tried to stay calm and immediately called 911. We were convinced someone broke in. As we were waiting for the police, they had him stay on the line. He checked the security system, which was still set. It would have gone off if a door or window were opened. When the police came, 2 officers did a sweep of the house inside, and 2 walked around outside. As I said, it was lightly snowing. There were no footprints, no tire marks in the driveway, absolutely nothing to indicate anyone had been to the house or gained entry. I don't believe in ghosts. But I have no idea what happened that night, and it is truly the strangest thing I ever have, and hopefully ever will, experience. The police had us call his parents. They spoke to them, asked them questions. The tableware was absolutely not out before. In fact, his mom said she couldn't even remember the last time she used the formal china. When my boyfriend's family first moved into the house, the former owner was convinced it was haunted. They never spoke to her about it. It was conveyed through the real estate agent, if I remember correctly. I have no idea, not even the slightest idea, how that happened. I've run every possible situation through my mind. Absolutely wasn't sleepwalking, as we had not even gone to bed yet. Wasn't my boyfriend playing a joke? He was as scared as I was and was the one to immediately call the police officers. I just don't know. If anyone is a police officer in CT, send me a PM. I'm out of state, but it would be cool to get a copy of the police report, as I don't think I've read it. I'm assuming there would be a report since they came to the house.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.